Welcome to the Adoption and Foster Care Journey, a podcast to encourage, educate, and equip you to care for children and youth through adoption, foster, and kinship care. Hosted by an adoptive mom with over 22 years of kinship and adoptive parenting experience. She's on this journey with you. Please welcome Sandra Flach.
Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways, acknowledge Him, and He will direct your paths. That is Proverbs 3, 5, and 6. I am your host, Sandra Flach. Welcome to this episode of the Adoption and Foster Care Journey. I am grateful you are joining me today. It is my great honor to offer you some encouragement and community and some support for your parenting journey. Raising kids with trauma, difficult to say the least, and if they were prenatally exposed to alcohol or other drugs, well, as we know, that is next level difficult. And I know because I am on this journey too. You're not alone, and there is a whole community of fellow parents and caregivers also on this journey. One of them is joining us today in just a couple minutes. But first, I'd love for you to check out this important resource that we have for you.
Sandra Flach, host of the Adoption and Foster Care Journey podcast, and FASD educator Debbie Raymond, invite you to join Hope for the FASD Journey, a virtual support community for parents and caregivers raising individuals with fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, diagnosed or not. This faith-based support community meets online 3 times each month, features special VIP guests, and a private Facebook group for members only, which includes Soul Care Saturday video devotionals led by Sandra and Deb. Both Sandra and Deb are adoptive moms raising kids with FASD and facilitators of the Facets neurobehavioral model. For details and to register, visit justicefororphansny.org/hope-community. That's justicefororphansny.org/hope-community.
So while this podcast isn't FASD specific, it's not the only thing we talk about, but it is a hot topic here because of the prevalence of FASD among children in foster and adoptive homes, in kinship placements as well. Most of the time our kiddos are not diagnosed, or they're misdiagnosed with a whole host of other things, ADHD, PTSD, autism, the whole list of things, oppositional defiance disorder, sensory processing disorder, lots of things which may be very accurate and true, but they also could be symptoms of FASD. So it's important that we understand and that we know about this. I find most parents that I talk to at first don't realize that that's what's going on. My kids had a diagnosis, and I still really had no idea what that meant and how that would impact our family moving forward and really their whole lives. And professionals, same thing. I've spoken with, a special education school teacher who said, "Oh, I think he's the first student with FASD I've ever had." And I'm like, yeah, no, probably not. You just didn't know before, because even not counting, kids in child welfare, the prevalence of FASD is 1 in 20 school-age children in the United States, right? FASD is the leading cause of developmental and learning disabilities worldwide. Most people don't know that, right? They're surprised to hear that it's 1 in 20, which is way more, prevalent than autism, but much less known. And of course, the numbers of kids impacted in foster and adoptive placements is significantly higher. So basically, So many families are struggling. We just don't always know what we're struggling against or struggling with. And as a mom of two young adults, both diagnosed with fetal alcohol syndrome when they were little, I spent years trying to figure out what was going on. We became trauma informed, learned the whole empowered to connect, connected parenting strategies, which worked until they didn't. And things just, as the older they got, the harder it got. And we had connection and we had attachment and, but there was still just these things. And then, we reached a point where I started thinking, I think I need to take a closer look at this whole FAS thing. And that's when I got professional training so that I could help not only my own family, but the more I learned, the more I wanted to help all of you, because so many of us are struggling with this and there's just not, answers out there. And, I've had parents who have told me that their pediatrician said, oh, that's not really a thing, or, oh, that can only be diagnosed at birth, or they weren't born with alcohol, in their system. They didn't test positive for that. Or, special education teachers, saying that's not really a thing, or, any number of incorrect statements. So we can't just trust that a doctor even or a special education teacher is going to know this. We need to know it. And then we need to advocate and fight for our kids. So that said, in addition to the support community that you just heard about in our little commercial, I also offer FASD training online and in person for parents and professionals, as well as parent coaching. So you can learn all about those things on our website. We do have some trainings already up there that are coming up in August, which is when this podcast episode will air. Coming up on Thursday, August 22nd at 10 a.m. Eastern Time, I have a 3-hour FASD workshop that I teach live. So it's very interactive. You can ask questions, but I unpack the impact that prenatal alcohol exposure has on the developing brain, the symptoms and characteristics of FASD, and some brain-based parenting strategies based on the facets neurobehavioral model that we kind of unpack and go through. And if you would really like the deep dive, which I offer a couple times a year, there is one coming up in October 2024. It is a deep dive into FASD, and it covers all of the things I just mentioned in the 3-hour, only we go way deeper in every area. It's 18 hours worth of content. We meet 6 times, once a week for 3 hours at a time. And we use the whole facets neurobehavioral model to unpack that and really go deep into this. And it was when I took that training several years ago, it just, was the catalyst for what I'm doing now and being so passionate about providing the help and the support that we are. So I hope you will check it out. You go to our website, justicefororphans.ny.org, where you can register for the workshops, the support group, and find out more about the parent coaching. There is a link in the show notes for that website, as well as for my sandraflach.com website, where I blog regularly about FASD and other things. So you can check that out as well. And of course, as every podcaster will ask you to do, please follow and like, and leave a review about this podcast, because when you do, it really helps podcast hosts out. It helps the podcast out because it shows the algorithm that people really like this podcast, and makes it easier for the next family to find it. So please make sure that you do all of those things. And if you'd like to watch your podcast, we do post the video version of this podcast on the Justice for Orphans YouTube channel. So you can find that there as well. And I always say, tell your fellow adoptive and fostering friends about this podcast so that they can take advantage of it as a resource as well. So all of the preliminaries out of the way, we get to our guest today. I'm super excited to introduce you to Kim Sheagren. Kim and her husband, Joel, are adoptive parents of 2 children, now young adults, ages 21 and 19 years old. Until their children became school age, Kim was home full time with their kids while working part-time in her husband's photography and film business. She somehow managed to work full-time in nonprofit communications for 14 years while her husband managed the direct day-to-day kid activities and being self-employed. Their oldest son lives with effects of fetal alcohol exposure, and their parenting journey has been and continues to be wide and vast. Their priority is continuing to learn of FASD, supporting and encouraging other caregivers, and working to successfully and safely launch their kids into adulthood. Kim and Joel and their family live in Blaine, Minnesota, with their stubborn 13-year-old Siberian Husky named Elroy. Kim is also a member of our Hope for the FASD Journey support group. So please welcome my friend, Kim Sheagren. Hey, Kim.
Hi.
I'm so excited to have you on the show finally.
I know. Thanks for having me.
I'm excited because I know I think I interviewed Joel, your husband, actually a few years ago. Time flies. And then you were able to join our support group. So I get to connect with you on a regular basis there. So I'm so excited that our listeners will get to meet you as well. And I always like to start at the beginning of the story. You guys have 2 adopted children. So what led you and Joel to pursue adoption?
Joel and I got married, a lot later. We were older parents, and we were ready to wanted to have kids right away because I was older. I was probably mid-30s or so when we got married, and Joel's a little older than I am. And it really wasn't working. We weren't conceiving and things like that. But I wasn't too wigged out about that. I know that families, it's really important to have birth children, and but we didn't go the 9 yards to make all that happen, and just thought, Lord, we're just going to trust you. And then our story is so bizarre in the sense that we were at a large worship service we're from the Minneapolis area, and there were 1,500 people in this worship service, and the pastor was like, well, I just feel it on my heart to pray for people for infertility. And Joel's way more outgoing than I am. And he grabs my hand and stands me up and he says, we need to get prayer. And so we're standing with a bunch of other people and got prayer for, having a family. And the woman who had come with one of our small group members turned around and said to me, I have a really close friend. She's 8 months pregnant and she really wants to place her child for adoption. Do you want a boy? And I was like,
oh, wow.
And Joel's going, woohoo, the Lord answered my prayer. And so it was a little not your typical path, but we did, it was funny. We met the birth mom the next week at this woman's house for dinner. And within a week, we had an anonymous gift to contribute to adoption expenses. And so, the Lord was just telling us that we couldn't say no. We had thought about adopting, but it was more thinking, an international adoption, and but we never got our act together for that. But I think the Lord just had something else planned for our family.
Wow.
So it was a very quick journey. It was a direct adoption. We got everything set that we needed in Minnesota, like any other adoption, with home studies and things like that. And so we took our son home from the hospital. So that was a blessing. And then the unique thing is we had all the birth mother's medical information, and she worked with our attorney. And our attorney was combination attorney and really social worker. She loved working with birth moms and was very prominent in the state of Minnesota in that space. So we were really blessed by that. And she helped us walk through an open adoption and all the different things necessary to make it all happen. We weren't connected with an agency for support. We weren't connected with other caregivers for adoptive support. So we were really on our own right from the start. And so in looking at the birth mother's medical history, we did see she had disclosed substance use and alcohol use during pregnancy. And I think I was more concerned about her smoking. She smoked a lot too. And so with the pediatrician and those things, those were the things I was getting, like as far as impact on the unborn child and things and what to expect as a birth parent. Nobody really said anything about the exposure to alcohol in utero. And so when he was born and being our first, I really didn't think twice about it. Being a new adoptive parent and being an older parent and being a parent of a boy as he started to grow, I was just more mindful of some challenges, I think. But that's like the initial story about how our family came to be.
Wow. And then you also have a daughter. So how did she join your family?
So interestingly enough, we had a really close relationship with the birth mom. And so it was direct relationship. And we, early on with our son, we would visit her and to see, so she could see him on a regular basis. And that was really meaningful for her and healing for her as a part of that. And we just had a good friendship. She had another unplanned pregnancy, probably roughly 2 years later. And then when she was 5 months along, she, in a regular conversation with us, she said, "Hey, I have another request. Would you be interested in adopting a girl?" Because she knew, that she was carrying a girl. And we said, of course. And so our children have the same birth mother. And then we were able to be at our daughter's birth, which was a really blessed experience.
Wow.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yep.
Wow.
And so the birth mom did use with our daughter as well. But as our children have developed, she does not have the symptoms and living with the effects like our son is currently. Yeah. And so, yeah. So later on, I learned a little bit about sometimes how that can be. So it's just, it's just interesting how that is, even though, they were both exposed in utero to alcohol.
Yeah. And that's even the case with twins. I know, several different cases where, twins, same pregnancy, both exposed, and then each twin, it presents completely different in each one, minimally in one to nothing, to where the other one may have a lot more exposure. So yeah, sometimes I feel like there's no rhyme or reason to it. I think it's so much, I'm not a doctor or a scientist and I don't play one on TV, but I think it's so much of that cellular level, like we just don't know, what's going to happen. So there's just no safe amount of alcohol or time in a pregnancy. And so you talked about, there were some things, but you didn't really know what to contribute them to. So, what were those challenges, like with your son, who definitely presented with an FASD? What were those challenges that you were facing that kind of started making you think something's up here?
Yep. So, as new older parents, we and our faith, we really looked at other Christian friends, Christian parents. We relied on our own upbringing, on parenting and experiences. I'm the oldest of 6 kids, so I had a lot of relationships with helping, with my siblings. You would just bring a framework, and when you're encountering different things, right out of the chute, our son struggled with sleeping and fussiness, as an infant. He hardly, although I should say right away, he slept through the night, interestingly enough, for a short period of time, but during the day, it was impossible to get this little infant who needed to sleep quite a lot to sleep at all. And it contributed to the fussiness, and so we, as new parents, we just kind of tried to work through that a little bit. But it never improved. I remember trying to get him to nap, and I would even put him in his like car seat, and I would brace myself against the wall and I would swing him like a swing. I didn't have a swing. And to get him to sleep, and he would stay asleep maybe 20 minutes. I'd set him down, and then it would just start all over. And I just knew he was just set up for, and me, not success for that little one who just needed that sleep. He also had RSV at a really, really young age, and then that caused implications with asthma and some of those medical pieces. But by at the time, I was home with them 100%, and I would take them to like a Bible study fellowship and different places where by the time he was 2 and 3, engaging with other children. And I always hated to go back and pick him up, because I would always have the teachers come to me and say, he's destroyed so-and-so's artwork and he's blah, blah, blah. And so he was a standout in just destructive behavior. And it was probably more serious than I really thought, because I was still thinking, oh, he's a boy, and stuff like that. But at age 3 too, that's kind of a point where you teach consequences, or 3-year-olds are starting to learn consequences, and there was no way on the radar that something like that was even sinking in. Wow. And by that time, I had started to do more reading about the impacts of alcohol, and the trigger for me was that consequence. Like there was no movement in teaching, and the teaching methods, the parenting methods for teaching that seemed so severe. Like I used some very severe, to get kids to learn consequences, timeouts, and blah blah blah. But I tell you, that exacerbated the separation between me as a mom and delivering some of those things, exacerbated the situation on a regular basis. And so it's funny. I remember there are 2 times in my parenting journey when I really was serious about seeking help with FASD, was when he was 3 and when he was 8. And we're really fortunate in Minnesota that we have a number of prominent, FASD resources. The University of Minnesota has an FASD clinic. And I remember twice I filled out an application to have him assessed, but I didn't have that support group around me at the time to fully understand how that would be helpful, because I walked away thinking, they're going to tell me he has it, and then they're not going to be able to do anything about it. It's not like I was looking for a pill or something like that, but I didn't understand the opportunity for supports in that space, and I really, really needed them. And so I really, my husband and I were just really hands-on more so, but that it would continue to be really difficult. So I hired a sleep specialist to help deal with the sleep, because to get him to sleep when he was 3 and older, we had to lay down with him to sleep in the same bed. And in the middle of the night, even until he was 15, I finally just stuck a bed on the floor next to our bed. And I joked around with my husband, there's going to be a night when he's not going to be 16 and coming up into our room and needing to be near us to sleep. But no doubt, until he was 15, he would wake up into the middle of the night and crawl, at least he wouldn't wake me up. I said, don't wake me up, because that just created, World War III in my home. Just lay down, and so that whole fear, there was just something going on with sleep that I think was, metabolism, fear, anxiety,
Very
things.
common
Yeah.
with FASD that there would be sleep issues.
Yep. And so we were just doing acrobats when it came to the sleep piece. So, and then he is also just had experiences in his body that were, I just want to say, more hypersexualized experiences that we had to work through. Just even at 4, just a preoccupation with private parts and preoccupation with others. And, when you're trying to teach appropriate touch and those kinds of things, there was just a heightened intensity in that space that is a journey that continued on through, the early school days and even into the middle school time, which just required us like a vigilant supervision and those things. So those were other early onset, but he's really high functioning, like school performance and things like that. He did not have any problem with math. Like he excelled in math. He didn't have any problem with reading. He didn't have any problem with academics really at all. And so it was all behavior. And it was, by the time he was in 2nd grade, we were selecting small private schools to really reduce the amount of distraction and also increase what we felt were more positive influences in his life. I know there are plenty of positive influences in the public school, but these were just smaller classrooms and things like that. But choosing a small private school, they didn't have the training and or the awareness of just even special needs or adoption, maybe that a public school might have. So we ran into some really difficult times in that space with school by 2nd grade. And the way they were doing, well, you just need to have them tested. I'm like, for what? For what? Because he'd be in the classroom. The other symptoms was just making noises constantly, being distracted, saying things to other children that would get you an in-school suspension, because it was more about, when he feels threatened, there's a heightened perception that, well, I'm going to kill you then, or I'm going to, and as soon as you started using those words, then you're in a space where
big trouble these days to say
and
that
it's just
in school.
it's that heightened sense of like, I feel like my body is in danger, right? And so it's an auto response. I really believed he'd never do that, or he wasn't in that space. And also in those times, I think he felt he was different enough and he wasn't getting the supports either from us and or from the school. And so he would also say like, I'm so stupid, I shouldn't be alive, and at night. And so those were just some warning signs that we weren't operating well as a family. The school wasn't helping him as a family, and we needed to make some changes. We needed to change our parenting in a big way.
Yeah. How old was he when he got the diagnosis?
We even when we tried to change our parenting, so it wasn't really until age 14, because we were still trying to manage symptoms by environments, by changing school situations. He'd gotten a diagnosis for ADHD and sensory processing disorder. And so all those periphery, secondary things, right, that I didn't understand at the first. And so it wasn't until our home was really falling apart with his outbursts and things like that. We had at 12, he had a situation where he was in a day treatment, to help with regulation and things like that. And we were really trying to learn more about all those things as a parent, but it really wasn't until 14. And I unfortunately used it kind of as my last ditch effort, in the sense that, okay, this is a deeper, more complicated issue. And we went to Proof Alliance here in Minnesota for their diagnostic clinic. Back then it was called MOFAS. And so that's where we got the diagnosis for that. But interestingly enough, we got all these other diagnoses that were more of the secondary, right, diagnoses, which weren't super helpful. But I think some of those help others understand the symptoms that your child is exhibiting.
Yeah.
So, and then in that small treatment time, we did end up exploring medication for some of the symptoms. So ADHD, we tried medicine for that, and that really, I mean, I don't think that really worked for Sam. And then for sleep and for anxiety, he has taken some medication. We tried some things for impulsivity, but it's been a large journey. Like, all through that time, he stole things. He'd steal cell phones from people. He would just steal money. He would steal nothing from stores, but he would, we lock up everything in our home. We lock up keys and cell phones and electronics, and we lock, even to this day, we lock our own rooms. And because he would go and search for things that he wanted or he thought he needed, and take things. And so there was a lack of understanding. I mean, he can tell you that what's his and what's somebody else's, but there's no inhibition,
Right.
to restrain that. So that journey was stealing things, and we thought was lots of lying. It would be, confabulation of things that really didn't happen, but it felt like they happened to him, whether they happened to someone else, or the intensity of the feeling was so much that it happened to him. So yeah, but that, long story short, it wasn't until he was 14, and that's when we started really digging into really how to parent someone living with an FASD.
Yeah, so that was leading me to my next question, is once he was diagnosed, how did you begin to educate yourselves and get training and really understand FASD so that then you could help your son?
We reached out to Proof Alliance they had a parent support person that I was able to reach out to and really talk about very specific things, like my concern about the hypersexuality. They just reinforced a lot of the things. Well, they felt like they normalized the things that were happening to us. They weren't so radical. And so having a parent support person to talk that out with, we immediately read, Diane Melvin's Trying Differently Rather Than Harder. We had already started changing some parenting styles with a program called Beyond Consequences, Logic, and Control with Brian Post. And I think it's Heather Forbes. And that helped from parenting from a love standpoint and a relationship focused standpoint. So some of these resources started helping us change our parenting style. I think my husband in particular, being a photographer and a filmmaker, he has delved way more into the community, the professional community, the clinical community, and building relationships and learning, and us working together and applying some of those things. Now being a part of the FASD Hope Facebook group is just transformational for me as a parent, because the things that I am currently dealing with now and have in the past, all the parents in the group relate, and they understand what I'm working with, and I receive amazing tips. And I keep saying over and over and over, I wished I had done this sooner and not felt like I was doing this on my own. But I didn't trust the systems at that time. So, yeah. And then when he was 16 is, part of the process then was to really be vigilant about keeping up with neuropsych evaluations and, getting into all the diagnostic assessments and neuropsych evaluations. At 16, they also diagnosed him on the autism spectrum disorder. And then from a school perspective, by that time we were trying to navigate the public school for high school just to get him to graduate. That was helpful in receiving the IEP services. We weren't going to be receiving IEP services at all because he was doing okay, average or more than average grades wise in school. We just didn't, there just wasn't any support for getting an IEP based on behavior and social interactions. Because really by the age 16, the divide between his social capabilities and other peers just got immediately vast. That was another thing that was eye-opening to us, it's such a broad chasm now. Whereas I think he worked really hard developmentally, or there wasn't that big divide, but I think as, we must be in that 16, 17, 18, we just progress more. I mean, I know our brains aren't fully developed until 25, they say, but just the maturity level and the interest level was just so vast at that age. And, so that was also another indicator that we needed those supports that we couldn't explain. That just seemed.
And were you able, what supports were you able to get when he was in public school and high school?
My husband and I joke around. We had Sam in 9 different school situations. So in really trying to get the supports that we needed, we had him, in a private school, and then we had him in an online school for a certain period of time. And then he was in public school for a short period of time. And then, we thought when he got the autism diagnosis, maybe there's a school that's specifically with a wide range of kids that are on the autism spectrum, and there he would not do that. So then we were really trying to line in that area of what are his interests and how can we tag his interests with learning. And we found a career and technical high school that's for teens grades 9 through 12. And they were really great. And that's where we ended up for his junior and his senior years. So it was really a project-based learning situation. There were instructors with smaller groups of kids. Part of it was through COVID, so that was a little bit difficult to get him responsive and to be online because they weren't meeting in person. But we were able to get him into a job skills program in Minnesota. It's called Tree Trust. And so he was a part of this about a 1.5 year program as part of school, where they in a cohort of 10, they took 10 students with a landscape company in Minneapolis, and they would go across the city and learn landscape skills. And he was outdoors and works with his hands. They would build sheds. They would do all sorts of cool things, which kept him engaged in some of his interests, which is really, really important in helping, I think, our kids be successful, is identifying those interests and really honing in on those to help them be successful, in a job or just life or, And so that was helpful. And just being able to do a science credit, a history credit on World War II. You create your own, to get your credit, create it based on something that you're interested in. So that's what was super helpful in pacing him through. And having an IEP was helpful because it did help create some accommodations and help inform the educators and teachers how they might work with him better. It was still a little bit of a challenge to get the IEP to really work. But our goal, was to help him graduate. And so we accomplished that goal of graduating.
Wow.
So
After 9 different
after
schools
9
or
different learning
educational,
environments. Learning environments.
wow.
Yeah.
That's dedication and perseverance, because I don't know how many parents would actually, 9 times. So that's incredible. So he graduated, and then how old is he now, and what's he up to now? How's he doing?
So he's 21 right now. And so we are legal guardians for Sam. That is one thing that we did before he was 18. Sam also receives waiver services through our state. So he has a regular in-home services worker that comes and helps with things like budgeting and helps him with some life planning, things that he's less willing or wanting to do with his parents now because he thinks he's an adult.
Yeah.
He is an adult, but he thinks that he's, doesn't need those parent supports. He has been working on and off. The challenge with the working has been the social, managing the social relationships with coworkers, understanding day-to-day administrative tasks related to maintaining a job, like punching in, punching out, navigating challenging or questions when it's prudent to ask a supervisor for help. There's a lot of embarrassment, not wanting to stick out, and he knows he's slightly different than other people, but he works really hard to blend in, and therefore he's not going to speak up for things that he needs on the job. The challenge with the job is we have a job coach that also works with him, and they have been trying to help him get jobs in the competitive job market. And then there's also that opportunity to have a job coach come with you on the job. But he doesn't want any of that. He wants to just have the job. And so what happens is he'll have the job for 3 weeks, 4 weeks, and then something will happen. He's been in a situation where not being able to handle a social situation. So rather than go to work, he just won't go to work anymore. And so that will be like a no-show. And most recently, he found a job in a kind of a sporting goods store, which he just loves. He loves fishing, and it was just the greatest job. And then with just some of his impulse control issues and some not being able to deal with peer pressure and wanting friends, which aren't necessarily good friends, he ended up losing his job because he had been strategically sneaking some merchandise, let's say. And so he had gotten caught and then let go. And there was a brief connection there with law enforcement because of that. So that ends up also being part of this journey is sometimes we just find ourselves in situations that we'd never expect. And, but so now he's unemployed, and we are trying to work the process of finding him supports with supplemental security income, or SSI. We've been denied twice. And would go for a hearing next. But I think that's going to be a challenging journey because he does present very neurotypical when he has good conversations with adults. He's and he, if you look at IQ, which may or may not mean a lot, he's like at average or higher. He just presents really well. It's just that when we get into the nitty-gritty of things, some of those needs are just so much higher.
And it's so common, because you're describing all of these really symptoms and characteristics of FASD, and it's an invisible disability because even if, my 2 boys have the facial features that are characteristic, but only a very small percentage of the population of people with FASD present with the facial features. And they can have average IQ, they can have a high IQ, they can have a much lower IQ. So it's I think I've heard Jeff Noble say, if you've met one person with an FASD, you've met one person, because it presents. So there's these common symptoms and characteristics, but yet it's kind of like all over the board when it comes to certain things. And I remember, one of the things back way in the early days, when my boys were diagnosed and I was looking, doing the internet search about fetal alcohol syndrome, it was a lot of, doom and gloom, hopeless outcomes for kids. Right. And I was like, shut off the computer. I'm not going to, because one of them was, jail, right? Yep. Becoming addicted to drugs, going to jail, suicide, all those terrible things, which are really, tertiary outcomes. Like if we don't understand the FASD and the behavioral symptoms, and then we're continuing to set these expectations because they look like they should be able to do A, B, and C, but then they can't, or they don't, and it looks like they won't, then, we'll see some secondary, which is, oftentimes the frustration, the anger, the depression, the problems at school and at home, and those things. But if it's still not addressed, it can lead to tertiary symptoms, which involvement with law enforcement, right? Yeah. And I remember going on a number of years ago to the Proof Alliance website, and we'll put a link in the show notes for this episode for Proof. And they have some great, like, 1-page documents that you can print out. And one of them was, some statistics, and it was like the average age an individual with an FASD becomes involved with the criminal justice system is 12.6 years old. Like I was like, it just stuck with me, the 12.6, because it's so young. But yet those of us who are parenting kids who are prenatally exposed, it's not all that surprising because of the impulsivity, because of, the executive function part of the brain, which is responsible for decision making, is often, very much impacted by prenatal exposure. So to be able to make decisions and to think out, oh, I shouldn't do this because I could get in trouble. And then there's the confabulation piece, which you talked about, where there's poor short-term memory. So their brain just fills in information where they have gaps and they don't remember. So it looks like they're lying or making something up. And just, it's like everything is stacked against them, for them, to preventing them from being successful unless their disability is understood and they have the proper support. So when our kids get to be teenagers and even into their 20s, they can be, they can get into serious trouble, not intentionally, but not even really understanding, because they don't understand the consequences either, because, the brain has to be able to make those links, right? And understand that, okay, because I did this, here's the consequence, and it's going to teach me a lesson. But oftentimes the consequence exacerbates the situation, increases their stress level, and, makes them very frustrated, because a lot of times they don't remember, because enough time has passed where with short-term memory, they don't remember. I know we just, in our support group recently, we had Maggie May, the young woman, she's 27, and she talked about, and I think we were all riveted to Maggie's story, because she talked about, her parents would leave a candy bar out on the kitchen table, and she'd come along and see it, and she loves chocolate, and there it's set, and she would just take it and eat it and not stop to think, oh, I should ask if I can have this, or if this belongs to somebody. And then, that night or the next day, the parents are like, what, where did you eat the candy? No, because she genuinely didn't remember. Too much time, even because of the short-term memory difficulty, it was gone. It was over. It didn't stick with her. So then to issue a consequence for something she doesn't even remember doing just causes frustration and can lead to that meltdown. And that's the kind of thing that we're all really dealing with. And it can make it so hard, with our kids, and they can end up in a lot of trouble. And it's not because they're not great kids. They are. It's just their brain works differently. And oftentimes it gets them into trouble. And it's heartbreaking as parents, watching them have to deal with some of those things.
Yeah. And then they might, at least our son will have one moment where, like, for example, you mentioned, Maggie May didn't think that somebody else might eat it. There are those, like, remote moments where they say, oh, has my sister eaten yet? Like, you're looking at the dinner. Has my sister eaten yet? Like, like he's thinking, oh my goodness,
yeah.
And then, but the next day, nope. It's
Nope.
just like the one moment they're going to be there.
Yeah.
As a parent, you think, oh, we're making progress. And then you just go back to where
Yeah.
it is.
It's
And so
inconsistent,
yeah,
and that's even a symptom of this. It's
yeah,
inconsistent performance. They might know it one day,
yeah,
in school, academically, they might know it.
yeah.
My younger son just got a job as a dishwasher. And I had to let his employer know, like, you might think he has it today, but don't be surprised if when he comes in next week, he doesn't remember where things go, because that's how his brain works differently. But it's hard when you're the parent or maybe the employer or the school teacher, when you're like, but you do this, like, you knew this. And they like, it's like they've never seen it before, and it's so common, and it's just as frustrating, and maybe even more so for the kid as it is for us, because they know they know that too, and they're not being intentionally
Right.
difficult, and it's so hard. So Kim, you mentioned the support group, so I did want to bring that up a little bit. You're a member of the Hope for the FASD Journey support group. We meet via Zoom the first 3 Tuesdays of every month, and then we have our private Facebook group where we interact, and we have a weekly devotional. So could you just share for our listeners who, maybe they're thinking they might need a support group? What has the support group meant to you?
Like I said before, I did not have any support, or when I'm going through things that are incredulous in my home, and don't have any place to go, this group is a place that gets it, and parents just understand. I'm not afraid of bringing up my mess ups, as a parent. We all like, oh my God, I really did that. And then I'm also not afraid to expose what my child is doing, because there isn't anybody in the group who either hasn't been there or just understands. And that really just means everything. And then two, just knowing that people are praying for me. One instance, I could not attend on a Tuesday night because we had that incident that I mentioned, with law enforcement with my son, and I was able to just send out an email to you and just say, hey, this is where I'm at today. I would love your prayers. And I know that everyone prayed for me.
Yeah.
And it's funny because I missed that episode because it was when you had Maggie May. So I tuned in to listen to Maggie May, and who was amazing. And I heard people praying for me. And I said, can I tell you that? Like, I knew that it happened, but when you know that they actually do that and you actually heard it recorded, like, what a blessing is that? Unbelievably. That was unexpected at the very end. I'm like, oh yeah. And it's so that was hugely a blessing. And then just the people like Maggie May, we have experts that, I always felt like I could be listening to my own son who can't voice those things. And so it gives me a little bit of an insight into my son, whether it be from that clinical view with cool people like Jared Brown, other amazing people like you had, Debbie Raymond, so many good people that speak into my life from that caregiver point, or parenting, specifically parenting, and just even clinically, like understanding the disability better. So
yeah. And I'm Debbie and I lead the group now, and I feel like it's vital for me to have that connection and know that all of us, it's primarily moms. We have an occasional dad that will jump in, but it's primarily moms. And, we're just this community all on this journey. We get it. All of our kids have been adopted or from foster care or kinship, and, they've all got the trauma piece. But like I talk about at the beginning of the show every time, but that's hard. But then add the prenatal exposure, and it's next level hard. And unless you're living it, people don't get it. And we're not getting it necessarily from the professionals even around us. So to have this group to be able to come together and be able to have these conversations and encourage one another, and we, share ideas, and I tried this and this works for me. And, we're able to do that. But, and then the prayer, being able to pray for one another. And I think it's the only Christian FASD support group in the world, unless somebody calls me or emails me and says, you're wrong, there's another one, I've never heard of another one. So the fact that we end in prayer, each one of our meetings, and then we have our support group, our private Facebook group, people, we will go in there and put a prayer request if something's going on, an emergency situation or whatever. And we're able to pray for one another and stay connected that way too. So it's such an encouragement for all of us. So thank you for being a part of that. And thank you for saying such kind words about it. Wanted to also ask you, you chose the verses I opened with, which was from Proverbs 3, 5, and 6. Kim, why did you choose those verses? What do they mean to you?
Ever since I was young, it was our family's practice to memorize scripture. And it's been my favorite verse ever since I was younger. I have a personal desire to be filled with God's wisdom, I even at like 30 or 20, I wanted to have gray hair because I thought that was a symbol of somebody who's wise, silver hair. Oh my gosh, now when I get them, I just pluck them out. I really, really, really want the Lord to be leading my path, particularly as a parent. And in Philippians, I believe, I had heard something too about trouble, and like we're guaranteed trouble in this life. And I'm really guaranteed trouble with parenting my son, to be completely frank. But I really do believe if I trust in the Lord with all of my cares, he will lead me through that trouble. And I guess that's why that verse means so much, is that I need to see the things in my life as he sees them, and then trust that he will light the way. It's not always going to end beautifully. It hasn't. But I've at peace that the Lord's leading me through that. So I think that's why that verse means so much. And I actually say it daily because I find myself in situations that, oh my gosh, Lord, I need your path through this one because there seems to be none.
I love that. It's one of my favorite portions of scripture also. And the Lord doesn't necessarily pluck us out, like our gray hairs, doesn't pluck us out of the trouble. We're going to have trials and tribulations, but he walks with us through them, and that's comforting to know, because we're all walking through stuff. I'm sure every one of our listeners can relate to that, because we're all, pretty much everybody here, adoptive and foster parents, kinship caregivers. So Kim, as we wrap up, would you leave us with some words of encouragement for our parents listening?
Sure. Words of encouragement. This may not seem very encouraging, but I think for me, when I am on a journey to need peace in parenting, there's a sense of just radical acceptance that the Lord's called me to this.
Yes.
And I think that if I reframe what I'm doing in my parenting from that lens, I can rest in peace that the Lord will guide me in this space. So just having a radical acceptance that the Lord has chosen me for a task like this, I hope gives people peace. So yeah, your dog sounded like they agreed.
Yes. And my husband walked through the door, doesn't know we're recording, and the dog had to bark because she woke up out of a sound sleep to hear that. So sorry, everybody, if you were startled. It sort of like called me to attention as well. But I want to say amen to what you said, because I know that's a lot of times what has gotten me through is just knowing that, God calls us to this. He placed our children in our family, right? That's what the scripture says. God sets the lonely in families, and he has a plan for each one of our lives. And this is our story, right? He placed our kids in our families. This is our calling. This is our mission field. This is our ministry. And sometimes, the natives are hostile, right? Sometimes it's just so hard. But when he calls, he equips. and he will guide us and walk with us through it. He doesn't just plop them in our family and leave us alone to figure it out. He walks with us through it and guides us, and we're called, and it is a calling. And it's not an easy one, but he does walk with us through it. So Kim, thank you so much for sharing your story today, and for sharing those words of encouragement and just being so transparent. Just so grateful that you're part of our group and that you agreed to share with us today.
I'm blessed that you had me on. Thanks, Sandra.
Thanks so much. Wow, I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Kim Sheagren. I just had a wonderful time chatting with her. Sorry about the dog at the end. My dog had to make her presence known. Thank you also for listening today to the adoption and foster care journey. I hope you were encouraged. If you have questions about FASD, if you heard Kim and I talking and you're like, sounds like my teen or my kid or whatever, feel free to reach out to me. You can email me directly. My email address is my name, Sandra Flach, at justicefororphansny.org. And there is a link in the show notes to my email address. And you can always try to reach me through the website as well, but you certainly can reach me directly through my email. I read my email. If you send an email to that email address, I will personally read it and respond to you. Maybe you want to explore FASD a little bit more, because I want to encourage you and equip you for your parenting journey. And I get it. Just like Kim, I'm a parent of, 2 young adults with fetal alcohol syndrome. I've gotten professional training. So I train on FASD for, I do trainings with parents and professionals. I know how hard the journey can be, and I want to provide you with the FASD resources I didn't have for the first many, many years of our parenting journey. Resources I couldn't live without today, including our Hope for the FASD Journey support community. So parent coaching, training, workshops, the support group. I hope that you will check those out, consider them, learn more on our website, justicefororphansny.org. Check out the show notes for all of the links. Find us on social media. Justice for Orphans is on both Facebook and Instagram, and LinkedIn, actually. And me, Sandra Flach, I am on all those platforms as well. So I hope that you'll find me and follow and friend and all of those good things, because I would love to be connected with you and hear more about your story. I'm grateful that you spent your valuable time with me today, and thrilled to have you along for the journey.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Adoption and Foster Care Journey podcast, brought to you by Justice for Orphans. We hope you were encouraged today. Please be sure to subscribe to this podcast and leave a review, and share it with your fellow foster and adoptive parent friends so they can be encouraged too. Be sure to find and follow us on Facebook and Instagram at Justice for Orphans, and check out our website for vital resources at justicefororphansny.org.